Welcome to Modern Marketing and Measurement, the Advertising Week podcast that takes you inside the fast-changing world of data-driven marketing. Each episode brings you sharp insights from industry leaders as we decode analytics, attribution, and performance through a future-focused lens. From emerging technologies and shifting privacy rules to the next wave of measurement strategies, this is your guide to staying ahead of the curve. Welcome back to Modern Marketing and Measurement. In this episode, I'm joined by Rick Miller, partner of marketing effectiveness at Big Chalk Analytics. We talk about a tough reality in modern media. Billions in ad spend produce little to no measurable return. Rick explains where measurement often goes wrong, why always on MMM isn't always the answer, and how better data, from local signals to real performance metrics, can help marketers make smarter decisions before budgets are wasted. Hey, Rick, I am so excited you're on the show today.
Hi, Becky. Happy to be here.
So I've spent 25 years in corporate marketing, and there was nothing that I liked better when bringing in consultants that knew what they were doing and somebody to come in and go over everything and give me an outside view looking in. Please, I'm very excited for you to tell me, explain what Big Chalk Analytics is and what you do there.
Well, I will say you're one of the first people I've talked to who's ever claimed to be excited to see consultants show up on their doorstep. But we think of ourselves as good consultants. We are Big Chalk Analytics, and we are marketing analytics consultants and data scientists, and attach a number of different professions to what we do. And we specialize in coming in and working with marketing departments and media agencies and other folks in the ecosystem to measure what's working from a marketing perspective and offer some insight on what could be done better or what's already going great and you might want to double down on. And we do all of this through a variety of relatively elaborate data science methodologies and marketing measurement models.
Yeah, I worked through Sarbanes-Oxley and SOX being implemented and all these things. So you can see why I like consultants. I think it also takes the emotion out of things. Like your departments can stay connected and emotionally connected without somebody else can be to blame for the metrics, or we can look at something else in the metrics. I think it's really important for teams. It helps break down silos. Maybe I'm a rare animal here, but I really do truly like consultants coming in. I think they're good for the team overall.
I don't know if all the brands we work with would admit it the way you just did, but a big part of what we do is just how people communicate across different silos and understand, oh, you're working on this and you invested here. We've been working on that and we invested over here. How do we know where we should be shifting our investments around? And a lot of times it really is just personal arbitration between folks, all of whom have the best intentions.
Exactly. So let's dig into that. One of the many things that you can point out here, Rick, you've said that even with record ad spending, a huge chunk of media investment basically does nothing. That's a pretty startling thought. From what you've seen, why is so much money going to waste?
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons, and they both tie back to a passion point of mine, which is marketing mix modeling. Which is where I spent a bunch of my hours in grad school doing case studies and learning. So first and foremost, there are a lot of brands that still don't employ any form of marketing mix modeling today, and thus they do not know with high accuracy which investments they're making are actually paying off in terms of product sold or other hard financial metrics. So they look at things like what we call interstitial metrics. Oh, I had X number of page views, or I had X number of link clicks, or other types of call to action that are not sales. And all of those interstitial metrics can be very interesting. They can even be very useful in how you plan But at the end of the day, you're spending money on marketing for one reason only, and that's to drive sales. And only marketing mix really does that in an efficient and very accurate manner.
You're speaking my language. This is my soapbox. Marketing is a tool for sales. Yeah, it's at the end of the day, right? Or else what are we doing? And then you argue the issue isn't talent or strategy, it's measurement frameworks that steer people wrong. What are some of the ways measurement quickly leads to smart marketers into bad decisions?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So, layering on top of my prior answer, which is, well, a lot of people don't do marketing mix at all, and that's bad. There are also a lot of firms out there who, frankly, aren't marketing mix experts and shouldn't be, right? Like, if you're a general marketer or a CMO and you've come up through a creative track or a strategic track, you don't need to be a data scientist. But the challenge you have is if you don't know how to vet your marketing mix provider, or you don't have a working understanding, at least at the fundamental level, of what the models should do and how they should perform, you may be getting bad model output. You may be getting ROIs that look to be too rosy or that look to be too negative, and thus you're shifting your budgets around in ways that are not being effective for the business and not driving more sales, as we just talked about, as being the core raison d'etre, if you will, for all of us doing this. So you can make two sins: one sin of omission, not doing any sort of marketing mix modeling at all, or employing a marketing mix methodology that just doesn't fit your business or just is not yielding the accuracy. Big Chalk, we're technology agnostic. Okay. We have our own modeling software that we've custom built, but we also use open source tools like Meridian and Facebook's Robin and other things out there. And we've tested even some proprietary tools. Sometimes, if the models are not implemented properly, there can be a 30% swing in the reported ROI from the real ROI. So if you have an ROI of, say, $1.25, right, which a dollar is neutral, so anything above a dollar is a good ROI, and you have $1.25 on a given tactic, if that's off by 30%, especially if it's off by 30% to the downside, now you're in the 90-cent ROI range. Now you're losing money. So if you don't know the validity of your models and you're not working with a provider, it will walk you through how the model was built and prove to you the validity of the model. You just don't know for sure. Can I trust the ROIs that were given to me? Can I trust the volume contributions that were given to me? So who you work with as a marketing mix provider is just as important, if not more important, than the underlying technology you use for the model. Okay. You have to work with people who can speak to your teams in a language they understand so that they trust the output and they can go make sometimes very big strategic bets based on that output.
All data is only ever as good as the query, right? And that's been as old as databases. We go back to Microsoft Access. I mean, your data is only as good as the query you put in. So speaking of that, you often talk about how even querying too often could be a problem. Why doesn't updating a model every few weeks actually help most brands make better calls?
Fantastic question, because it's one of my pet peeves in the industry. So the industry of marketing mix modeling has evolved, mostly in very good ways, over the last 10 to 15 years. And one of the things that we can do as modelers, because of improvements in data processing and cloud-based modeling, is update models almost as fast as we want. If we have input data coming from the brands and coming from the media agencies, we can harmonize that data and model almost instantly. There are more SaaS-heavy mix providers out there, some of whom we've talked to and worked with in the past, that tout their ability to update models literally every day. Sounds awesome. And there are a lot of CMOs that hear that, and because they're under so much pressure to do things faster, they think, oh, I must have to do it daily. If it's available daily, I should do it daily. But here's the challenge with marketing mix as a discipline and speed. Marketing mix models, by their very nature, tend to look at a longer time period of data than, say, an A/B test or a lift model or something that might work in a shorter duration. A marketing mix model, because it controls for so many variables that are not related to marketing, like macroeconomic conditions and unemployment rates and things that absolutely affect whether a consumer can buy your product, but aren't captured in Google Analytics, aren't captured in your native, digital platform of choice analytics. These things have to be counted in a marketing mix model, and those things do not move quickly. Those are things that we look at months and months worth of data. So when we build a marketing mix model, it usually has 2 years of data. It might have 3. It might even have more, although that's pretty rare. If you have 2 years worth of data, okay, let's say that's 104 weeks of data. And let's say you update your model weekly. We won't even be so crazy to say, I'm going to update this model daily. Let's say we update the model weekly. Essentially, you've dropped one of the 104 weeks of data off the back end and added 1 new week of data on the front end. That's not changing your model. You've basically moved the model by less than 1% of the data that's in the model in the first place to build it. So nothing should happen when you review the new set of data in that model. And if something does happen, it's probably indicative that there might be an error in the model or the data that you just brought in, because you just don't change a model when you only swap out, 1% of the data that's used to control for the model. So this concept of updating marketing mix models on a daily basis, on a real-time basis, even on a weekly basis, doesn't make a lot of sense mathematically, because you're just not changing the foundational data in the model. The other thing that's interesting about that, consumer behavior, for the most part, doesn't change that quickly. There are maybe a handful of categories, and I won't even try and name them on this call because I'll either leave one out or get one wrong. But there are only a small handful of categories where a consumer sees an ad and immediately acts on that ad and makes a purchase. They exist. It's not none, so it's not zero. But for the most part, especially with consumer products, brands, consumer insurance, automotive, tech, most of these things, you have to plant the message with the consumer and build awareness. Then you have to drive them down a funnel, right, to consideration. None of these things happen in the span of a day or a week. And a lot of times you don't even see results until a month or 2 months or 3 months in. So updating your model at these crazy fast model refresh rates, while it's cute, right, for us as practitioners in the industry to say, yeah, we can do that, it doesn't really change things from a business perspective. And you're much better served if you're the CMO or the brand strategist who's evaluating your marketing mix options to work with a provider that's going to update models at the frequency that makes sense for the product you sell. That's simple.
As a forecasting nerd, I love this. I love that you bring in economics. I think a lot of people get stuck in the arc and forget the parabola. If anybody out there studied any of this and knows this, the arc is short term. It's always going to parabola out, especially if you studied economics. And I feel like we're getting over this quick pivot time, and clickbait fatigue has set in, and we have to go back to basics. We need long tail marketing. You got to remember communications 101, know your audience, get them emotionally involved, create a habit. That takes time. And, going back to those basics, really pay attention. These instant metrics just tell you how long it's taking to set in those habits that take time, but you still got to watch and wait for the full parabola, not just the arc.
That's right.
At Advertising Week Europe, we thrive on the big conversations, and we are gearing up for more. Mark your diary, save the date, block out the time, because we're back at 180 Studios for the ultimate mashup of content for marketing, media, creative, and tech professionals. Join us for Advertising Week Europe at 180 Studios in London on the 24th through 26th of March. This isn't just another industry event, it's where business gets personal, ideas get real, and the smartest people in the industry come together to make things happen. Don't just join the conversation, drive the change. For more information about Advertising Week Europe and to secure your pass, visit www.advertisingweek.com.
I love that. Another thing you talk about is how national or total market data can blur what's really happening locally. How often do you see brands make the wrong call simply because the averages look fine?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. I'm glad you asked it in the order in which you asked it, because the answer to this actually ties back to the time question that we just talked about in terms of how frequently should you update models. So one of the reasons that some providers update their models really quickly is they're using national level data. So if you think about that marketing mix model, again, I'll use the standard 104-week time period, right? Instead of looking at 200 or 210 DMAs by week, they're just looking at the total national marketing investment by week. So they're looking at the data at a national level over weekly periods for X number of periods, whatever's in their model. And that allows them to model quickly, because when you have all these different regions or DMAs or cities or whatever geography you're using to compartmentalize your data, all that data needs to be aligned, not to go too deep into the nerdy part of the data, but it has to be harmonized in a data grid, right? So that everything lines up so that it can be effectively modeled. Well, that inherently takes a little bit more time than doing everything at the national level. The challenge that some advertisers that we work with have is that their products have regional or local components to them, and they want to make sure they're advertising differently in different DMAs or in different regions, sometimes deploying their advertising budgets at different time periods in those regions, sometimes different offers, but at the same time, but different across region. If you're modeling using national level data, you inherently cannot break down the differences at those local market levels. So as an advertiser, again, back to my initial opening point about knowing your methodology, knowing what works for you, there's not a right answer or a wrong answer in this case. It's just, okay, what am I trying to do? And will this geographic granularity or this time period of model refreshes map to what I need for my business? And that's where, again, a lot of brands, because they are not inherently marketing mix data scientists by nature, make mistakes because they just don't know, right, to ask these questions of their providers when they're having the initial conversation to employ marketing mix in the first place.
That's smart. Yeah. Got to hire the right talent. So, okay, so we've sliced this along the X plane and the Z plane. I want to go down into the Y plane and talk about channels. When brands try to compare TV, search, social, and everything else, it can feel like apples and oranges. What's a more grounded way to evaluate performance so those comparisons are actually fair?
Yeah, another excellent question. So, two things to look at. The first thing is, okay, what types of channels do I have? And the great thing about marketing mix, because of the way the model structure is designed, it is very flexible in terms of the channels that you can measure. So if you look at like MTA and other other methodologies that are out there, most of them really kind of lean toward digital channels, and they're not very effective when you try to bring other channels into the mix. Marketing mix is completely flexible with respect to channel. I've told clients in the past, if you pay to spray paint zebras with your marketing message and run them down Broadway, if you can tell me how many people were on Broadway that day, I can include that in my marketing mix model, and I will tell you if that execution actually worked. Okay. So if you need to compare spray painted zebras to the impressions you bought on Meta, last quarter, we can do that for certain. However, now we've got to talk about what is the unit of measure that I'm actually applying across different tactics. our default measure is to look at impressions. So we want to know, okay, how many impressions or how many people did those zebras touch when they ran down Broadway? And how many people or impressions were served up on Meta so that we understand, okay, this was what was served up to the marketplace to potentially be interacted with. There are modeling platforms out there now that tend to use marketing spend as a proxy for impressions. And there are certain cases where this could work, but there are a lot of cases where it does not work because what you spend doesn't always yield the same number of impressions across channels. So it's best to boil down, okay, what is the actual, how is this channel serving up the ad or the information to the consumer, and use that as your base metric for modeling, as opposed to rolling up to a higher level, which would be spend, right? So for us, the great news is we're very channel flexible when it comes to marketing mix. I wouldn't say bad news, but the thing you have to think about is, okay, knowing that I'm going to have all these channels included in my marketing mix, what is the right metric of execution in that channel that I should look at? Most of the time, it's impressions. Most of the time.
I guarantee, metaphorically or actual, spray painted zebras are going to win every day. I think everyone wants that spray painted zebra because that will take everybody off of Meta in a second, even if they're on Broadway on their phones. That would be brilliant. I'm going to take that. I'm never going to forget spray painted zebras.
If any brands activate on that in the next 6 months, I want a royalty for that. Okay, I need to be included in that somehow.
You've heard it here.
It's on your podcast. It's out there now. If we have a spray painted zebra execution, please don't make me call my lawyer. Right.
Maybe don't say execution after zebra. We're gonna get in trouble now. Okay, now, no more seriously, and this is where I need you to nerd out for me. There's a lot of people who buy into or want to apply different theorems and methods and fancy techniques. From your perspective, how much does the math really matter compared to basics like clean data, thoughtful design, and results people can understand?
Yeah. So the way you phrase that question is almost a loaded question, because clean data and understandable results are always the things that we're going to stress, right, is the most important. However, there's lots of conversation in the industry today about different modeling techniques. The big one that you see in all the different LinkedIn subgroups where people like me nerd out about marketing mix is typically using, say, like a Bayesian model versus a traditional time series, regression model for marketing mix. Again, and I always feel bad when I'm on media interviews and podcasts talking about this, saying, well, it depends, because then everybody's frustrated because they all want the easy answer. There are reasons and times when you would implement one or the other, but most of the time, if you're working with a large, robust data set, which even small advertisers have, most of the times they think, oh, I'm too small, I don't have a large data set. You'd be shocked at what is large, okay? A typical time series regression model works fine when compared to something like a Bayesian model. Bayesian's great if you don't have a lot of data to work with and you've got some prior knowledge of how different tactics perform, and you can apply that prior knowledge into the model. It can work, and it can be perfectly applicable. But a lot of times, a straight old time series regression model works great, and it's often easier to explain to non-modelers, non-data scientists, to business users who just need to understand visually or how, what have you. Okay, when we executed this, what was the result that we saw? How do I take this into the CFO's office to say, you know what? We spent $2 million on this particular tactic last year, and look, it did really well. If you give me more money, I'm going to bring you back higher, results next year. And a lot of times that's just easier explained with a more basic, unsexy, old school time series regression model than some of the more advanced model, techniques that are out there.
I would like to defend personally, and on record here, your "it depends" answer. As someone who, again, has hired consultants and third parties, I like that answer because that means you're going to ask questions and listen. For every question I ask you, I expect 5 questions back. And if I'm hiring you and I want you to come in, I don't want you to give me if this was quick and easy, we wouldn't have an industry. You know what I mean?
That's
We
right.
wouldn't be
That's right.
having this podcast. We wouldn't be having this conversation if this was easy and there was an easy answer and a one size fits all. We wouldn't have to have MMM. It wouldn't be here. So in defense of your "it depends" answer, that's the answer I want.
Well, one of the most exciting things about working in this industry is everything's different. Every brand is different. Even if you're working with brands in the same category, some brands come to market with a different value proposition and a different message, and their media is not going to perform the same way. Their marketing investments are not going to perform the same way as the very next competitor right next to them on the shelf, right? Because of how they approach consumers. And that's what makes this industry really exciting. It's also what makes the "it depends" answer common. And it makes cookie cutter solutions very difficult to employ because there is no one size fits all for any of this stuff. And it really matters who you work with and what questions they're going to ask about your brand. It really is crucial.
And you would hope that they are. I mean, if you're hiring somebody to come in, you're looking for a bespoke service. You want to be able to maybe use some of the more cookie cutter tools, but you have to learn how to apply them correctly. And if you have somebody come in and tell you how you could do that, again, your data is as good as the query, So yeah, come back to it all the time. So at the end of the day, what separates measurement that looks smart in a deck from measurement that actually helps marketers make better decisions day to day?
Well, again, first off, customizing the methodology to meet that brand and what the objectives of that brand are is very important. Okay. Again, no one size fits all, no cookie cutter. It's got to be bespoke. And I don't care how slick the interface is and the dashboard is, and I don't care how tempting and tantalizing this idea of we'll automate the whole thing and update your model every day sounds. It's unfortunately probably not realistic in today's environment. If you want to see results, you really need these bespoke solutions. But the good news to all this is they're not as expensive as they used to be. They're not as time consuming as they used to be because you can still apply very customized models, using techniques on the back end that the client never sees, that cuts the modeling time down to a couple of days and cuts the delivery time down to results to a few days. So all of this stuff, even in a very customized fashion, is doable much faster and much cheaper than it was 10 years ago. So the industry has changed in many ways for the good, even if you're going to adopt a fully customized solution. It shouldn't be scary. It really shouldn't.
So you worked my segue for me. I really appreciate that. You said things are not as time consuming as they used to be. Looking into the future and current AI disruption changing to pay per performance model versus the old way of paying for creative hours. How do you see that affecting the future of MMM?
Yeah, great question. It's, I think, going to shine a spotlight on MMM like has never been shined on MMM before. MMM's been around for 30, 40 years, so it's not new, it's not trendy. And things that aren't new and not trendy in our industry tend to get swept under the rug. But MMM is the most accurate tool we have today to tease out true performance of marketing activations. Again, because it controls for so many things outside of marketing that are hard to see, but have very, very real implications on whether consumers can and will buy a brand's products. If AI is going to compress the hourly model at agencies, if brands are saying, yeah, I'm not going to pay you X number of hours for creative, I'm not going to pay you X number of hours for strategy, I'm only going to pay you if you can prove to me that you've moved the needle with the advertising that you've executed, then marketing mix is the tool that's going to be the foundation of proving that out. And it's going to become very important. Marketing mix for many years has been, I hate to say it, a nice to have. I'd love to know what's performing and how it ranks and where I should shift my money around. But the CFO is still going to give me a budget next year. I'm still going to go make ads next year, and they'll probably be fine, right? Well, when agency contracts hang in the balance, when people's jobs hang in the balance around performance, it might be fine is not going to be an acceptable answer. You're going to need a tool that you can trust, that you can explain, that you can defend, that either agencies will roll out or the brands will roll out as kind of a report card to say, yep, we paid you to move the needle. And look at that, you did. And here's how much you moved it. And here's how much you'll get paid. Or, this doesn't look like you moved the needle at all. So, MMM is going to become more important than it already is as we get into this new operating paradigm. And how long it's going to take to get there, I don't know, but things seem to keep happening faster and faster than we predict. So who knows?
Right. It's funny the old years of, marketing being kind of nebulous and we could give some metrics. And I remember early on reading How to Lie with Statistics, which you could do, a little bit easier back then. But if an MMM is pumping out the numbers for you, it's a little bit harder to skew the facts. But then we would try and we think that these are the stats, and it's just, before internet or internet click, capture and things like that, or like traffic capture. And if you didn't have server-side stats, your capture was kind of fuzzy, And so now that we have all of these and it can go faster, it's interesting look into the future there.
Well, the old John Wanamaker quote, right? I know half of my advertising budget is wasted. I just don't know which half. Exactly. I think it's going to go away. I think it's going to go away.
I love that.
And that's probably a good thing.
Exactly. So this has been fantastic, Rick, as one of my favorite conversations yet. You're fantastic. If people wanted to find you or more about your company, where should they go?
Absolutely. So you can find us at www.bigchalk.co. Big Chalk, just like sounds, Big Chalk. Again, my name is Rick Miller. I'm a partner at Big Chalk. And if you search Rick Miller plus Big Chalk on LinkedIn, you'll find me pretty easily. Or even if you just put Rick Miller and Big Chalk in Google, you'll get a whole variety of interesting things that pop up when you do that. But they will lead you to me.
Great. Thank you so much for coming today, Rick.
Thanks, Becky.
Thanks for listening to Modern Marketing and Measurement. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider subscribing and sharing with your colleagues and friends. For more podcasts like this one, be sure to check out Advertising Week's growing roster of podcasts for the advertising, marketing, and technology industries, including AW360, Agency Alchemy, Retail Media Unboxed, and AI Machine-Made Marketing. All available now at www.advertisingweek.com/podcasts.
For more podcasts like this one, be sure to check out Advertising Week's ever-growing roster of podcasts for the advertising, marketing, and technology industries. You can find those at www.advertisingweek.com/podcasts.